Hello and welcome to White and Case's Leaders in Water interview series. My name is Yasser Riyad and I'm a partner in White and Case's Abu Dhabi office and a member of the firm's global water industry group. I'm delighted today to be joined by Laura Thompson, General Counsel of the Emirates Water and Electricity Company. Welcome, Laura. Laura, would you tell us about your role and your current remit and what you enjoy most?
So I am General Counsel for, as you said, Emirates Water Electricity Company, or EWEC as we call ourselves. And I'm responsible for the legal regulation compliance teams within EWEC. And I'm actually the only general counsel that's ever been of EWEC since we were established in 2018, and I've built the team up from scratch. We're working on a lot of strategic initiatives in diversifying the UAE's energy mix and strengthening UAE and Abu Dhabi in particular socio-economic growth. So it's incredibly diverse and challenging and interesting and multifaceted role.
In 2022, at the launch of the UAE Water Security Strategy, the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure commented that the UAE is fully aware that water security is the cornerstone of national security. Given the importance of water security to economic development and national security, how is EWEC responding to the challenges of securing water resources for both current and future needs?
Okay, so EWAC's implementing several strategic initiatives to address the challenges of securing water resources for current and future needs, and this is all in line with the UAE's water security strategy for 2036. The first thing that EWAC does when it builds its new plants, it considers where those are being built, so there's a strategic decision about where the plants are built. Then there's a second position in terms of what is built. So most recently, EWEC has shifted from traditional cogeneration, water production, to low carbon intensive reverse osmosis production through all this desalination technology to further decouple power and water electricity production. This gives Abu Dhabi and the UAE greater flexibility and efficiency in that water production. But looking at just through the adoption of RO technology itself and the integration of renewable energy, the aim is to achieve a 93% reduction in carbon emissions associated with water production by 2031. So that's really important for the EWEC strategic carbon reduction initiatives, and that works in line with water infrastructure and independence.
Laura, can we explore with you some of the unique legal and compliance challenges that are faced in relation to the development of water infrastructure in Abu Dhabi? And how are these challenges being addressed?
So it's important to understand that Abu Dhabi's water infrastructure development is governed by multi-layered regulations involving a number of different entities, including the Department of Energy, who's our regulator, and the Environment Agency, Abu Dhabi. And close coordination is required to ensure the projects comply with those environmental regulations and principles from both entities. So at present, Abu Dhabi is streamlining its regulatory processes by unifying various water-related regulations under the DOE and EAD to address some of the associated challenges and to ensure consistency in these compliance requirements. And this is quite a challenging process because a lot of these laws sit under a myriad of different regulations. So it's a very exciting project that's ongoing. In terms of other challenges, legal frameworks, that enforce water conservation and sustainable resource management necessitate significant investment to be efficient and transformative and to utilize these low carbon desalination technologies. One of the biggest challenges that we have is securing land for water projects. As we know, it's coastal and it competes with a number of different sectors, including oil and gas, maritime, entertainment, hotels. Everybody wants to be on the beach in Abu Dhabi. There's also an increased emphasis on public consultation during the planning stages of water infrastructure projects to address concerns related to land use and environmental impacts. And in particular, what we're seeing is increased engagement by the agricultural sector in Abu Dhabi. Other challenges include developing water projects and infrastructure projects to meet both local international water quality standards. And that means advanced treatment technologies, regular monitoring, not just at the generation side, but all through distribution. And then new regulations to mandate that infrastructure be climate resilient, addressing challenges such as extreme weather, carbon emissions, and then more importantly, to implement advanced monitoring technologies and robust enforcement mechanisms to implement and ensure compliance with environmental standards, which are ultimately in place to protect the environment and also all end users in Abu Dhabi.
As one of the most water scarce countries in the world, the UAE relies on desalination for its drinkable water supply, such as the recently commissioned Tuila RO industrial water project. Can you talk a little bit about Abu Dhabi's desalination program and any other water recycling or conservation measures in progress or planned? And do you foresee any challenges with developing such water infrastructure in the future?
As you know, the major driver for adopting RO instead of thermal desalination is that it's more efficient and it enables carbon emission reduction on water production. So effectively, an RO plant, for the uninitiated, although I'm not obviously an engineer, is something that can operate like any piece of industrial equipment. It just needs to have the water, and it can be powered by whatever electrons are produced. So whether those are low carbon or renewables, that makes that water production more efficient. We talk about Tuila RO, but actually Abu Dhabi has been working with RO desalination for a while. There are a number of projects that we had before Tuila RO, just not as big. Fujairah 1, Fujairah 2, and then Murpha 1. And we've got an incredibly exciting project, which is Sadia Islands RO, which we're working with you on, which we haven't yet closed, but that's 273,000 cubic meters per day. And it's currently in the development process, but the commercial operations are expected in Q4 2027. And that's an incredibly exciting project because it's actually really in the center of Abu Dhabi and Abu Dhabi development. So the plan is by 2029, the RO was going to represent 85% of total installed water capacity, with reduction in carbon intensity, like we said, of 93%. So for example, at present, it's 16 kilograms per meters cubed in 2021. And then by 2031, the carbon intensity will be 1 kilogram per meter cubed. So that's an incredible step towards decarbonisation. And aside from the challenges that we talked about before in terms of regulation of land access, etc., we don't see any real challenges to that water infrastructure because, the UAE is very focused on it. It's very focused on the positive reduction in carbon emissions that RO brings, and it's a very keen technology.
Thank you, Laura. And on Sadia Island will be closing soon enough. Climate change is a growing concern globally, but will likely have a substantial impact on already water-stressed regions, especially in the Middle East. What do you see as the key issues emerging from climate change in the water sector from a legal and regulatory perspective?
So we as EWEC, when we look at the areas that we would look at in terms of water production, are in relation to obviously the RO technology that we've talked about, and that we see impacts water quality through increased seawater temperatures and salinity, also potential increases in storm frequency and intensity, which can affect desalinated water production. So people might not think how is that going to affect RO production, but if you have greater turbidity, I think it's called, and the engineers can correct me, on the seabed, then that those storms can impact on on RO plant's ability to filter that water and the particulate in the water. So in terms of what we look at, we monitor heavily the the seawater temperature, salinity, and those changes within the areas outside of Abu Dhabi. It's also part of our decision-making process in terms of where to put plants, what type of seawater inlet and outfall in particular to use to make sure that the plants have the optimal conditions to be able to produce as much water as possible. So for me, I think the biggest challenge is that we need to be able to have laws that support adaptive strategies that includes incentives for water saving, water reuse technologies, regulations for sustainable use, and infrastructure improvements for changing water patterns. I mean, legal and regulatory mechanisms should also encourage that investment in the right infrastructure, in desalination and strategic storage. I think effective monitoring enforcement are essential for compliance and sustainable water management. I think it's not really with EWEC, but management of tariffs and on different sectors is a regulatory tool that can be used to improve that management and efficiency of end users. And then obviously we can use legal frameworks to update and enhance data collection as well, because it's one thing to say, oh, we need to reduce the amount of water that we're using, but it's another thing to say how and until the monitoring and the metering is in place and the regulatory requirements for users to have that monitoring and metering in place, then we're not going to know where we're starting from and where we're going to. And then also we need to think about how we protect water sources. I mean, obviously ours seawater, and everybody thinks, well, the sea's there, it's huge, there's lots of it. But obviously there's a focus there in terms of maintaining seawater quality. There's an environmental aspect to that. There's ensuring that there's no spillages, and also on groundwater. We talked about that earlier, and we talked about the access to groundwater by the farming communities in Abu Dhabi. That groundwater needs to be protected and managed, and in order to do that, we need to know who's accessing it, where, and for what reasons. And then and to protect those users as well with that access, to make sure that everybody at least knows what's being used.
The water sector is under pressure to operate on a low or zero emissions basis. How is Abu Dhabi managing the challenge of decoupling its water and power production and enabling a transition away from legacy thermal desalination infrastructure?
I think it's an extremely positive story, actually. I think that several years ago, a commitment was made to focus on that decoupling, and as a result of that, and we talked about it earlier, we've got we've got Taweelah Oil project, and then we've got Shwayhat 4, Mirfa 2, and Abu Dhabi Islands are all coming in to ensure that happens. I think what's been incredibly interesting is managing the challenge through that development, because there's a point in time where we've now got a lot of solar power, we have nuclear, low carbon nuclear power in the system here in Abu Dhabi that can all produce very low carbon electricity in the winter, and we don't then need a lot of our CCGT and OCGT plants on in that winter. Now, I mean CCGT generally, because that produces water, but we're at a period now where we still need some of it on to produce enough water until we get sufficient production from the next plants that are coming along. So that's been particularly challenging to manage from an operational perspective. But I think that when we look at just our desalinated water, it's a strategic pillar in that tool, and it's something that we're very focused on ensuring takes place to allow this full decoupling to give Abu Dhabi greater flexibility and especially in the winter and its winter periods, and to reduce the carbon producing technologies that are used for power and water in the winter period. So yes, and it's just a part of the strategic plan now.
Great to hear the transition is going well, and look forward to the plants coming online and cleaner air for everyone. Looking forward, and as our final question, what do you see as the key emerging trends and practices in the water infrastructure space in the Middle East? And what do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for water utilities such as EWEC in the years to come?
Key trends, I think we're looking at advancement in RO desalination technology, with a focus on sustainability and efficient use of water. And if we're looking at technologies, what we're really looking at is, membrane technologies, improving those technologies for greater to filtration at higher temperatures or with more increased TDS in a cost-efficient manner. We're seeing a definite emphasis, and this is starting now, on, like I said, efficient use of water and water reuse and recycling. And part of the study that I said earlier that's ongoing with DOE and EAD and a number of other stakeholders in Abu Dhabi is looking at that reuse and recycling. And I think what we'll see is an increased focus on reuse and recycling, and offering that as an offering to many different industrial users. But yes, so there's a lot of users who are coming on board in the industrial sphere will definitely be used and offered reused and recycling water, so as to not to use up the drinking water. And then I think, as with every sector, we're going to see an integration of smart water management through AI. I mean, that requires, like you said, a lot of metering, a lot of data to go in for that to happen. And we're starting to see that already, and that's gaining traction. I think we're going to see a lot more private investment and expertise to water projects through the public-private partnerships that EWEC runs. We might see those being sought out from different end users in different ways. I think that there's going to be a lot of modernizing of infrastructure, smart technologies, and it's actually a green technology for the Middle East. So that's I see we greater access to green financing for RO, I would suggest, and then trying to manage all of these opportunities of technical innovation with regulatory reform, with investment, to enhance that security, but at the same time, as a period of transition, both environmentally and technologically, is going to be really challenging.
Well, it sounds like there's no shortage of initiatives and priorities on your plate, Laura. But it sounds all like everything's moving in a positive direction for the environment and for reducing carbon intensity and creating more efficiencies within the system. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining this series and for taking the time and for your participation, and look forward to speaking again soon and closing those projects you talked about.
Thanks, Yasser. I think I just want to say I appreciate that our key stakeholders, which White & Case is one of them, really take an interest in what EWEC are trying to do as a business and the technology and the development in the water sector. So that's very interesting. Thanks very much.